start my story in a way that I think every woman here probably has a story that starts like this, which is, my mother will never let me forget this. There I was, 6 years old, leafing through some old history books, and I come upon a picture that looked very much like this. Women standing outside wearing the yellow star. And I said, Ima, look. Look how beautiful. Look what they got to wear back then. Because how would I know that the symbol that was embroidered on my father's talit bag, that my mother wore in silver around her neck, how could I know that this symbol that I knew as a symbol of strength, of community, of protection, would become a symbol of discrimination, of targeting, of annihilation? To me, to 6-year-old me, and to so many people that lived through the Holocaust, genocide was unimaginable. We do not have that luxury anymore. Genocide is happening all around us. On a Jewish World Watch, we believe that as a community of people that have experienced genocide ourselves, we have a particular moral obligation to speak up when genocide happens, and more than that, we have a particularly resonant voice in speaking up. So let's make sure we know what we're talking about here. Really quickly, definitions. Genocide is the intentional annihilation of an ethnic, racial, national, or religious group. There's 2 words in the definition that are important. Any guesses? Genocide is an intentional act, it is a purposeful act, and it is a crime committed against a group of people. And believe me, there are all sorts of social science definitions. This language comes from the UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide. Social scientists have been arguing about the actual definition of genocide for decades. Some of them have broken up because of it, whatever. This is the definition we're going with. Acts committed with the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group as such. So we know where genocide could happen. We know that genocide could happen anywhere, and that has, in fact, happened all over the world. Just any guesses since we all said never again in 1945? Any guesses how many genocides we've actually stood witness to? I mean, call out the ones that you actually know about. Darfur, Rwanda, Serbia. And so 6, 7, 8, 46 genocides since 1945. We're in 2011. So let's think about that for a second. But we know where genocide could happen. We have so many genocides that we've been able to compare and contrast and figure out what the conditions are in a country, in a society, that lead to genocide. If there's a giant war and these building blocks are already there, we know these countries right here are at risk of escalating into genocide. And we know this based on 7 factors. First, prior genocide. Those 46 genocides, there we go. Sometimes it's a little bit shocking. You know that Rwandan genocide that you guys were so quick to jump up about? That was Rwanda's second. Neighboring Burundi had 3, Democratic Republic of Congo 2, Uganda 1. That's all, those are all neighboring countries. We have them in every single part of the world, and that's just since 1945. If a country has had a genocide before, they are exponentially more likely to have a genocide again. The governments become habituated to genocide. They believe that genocide is a legitimate solution to a political problem. Instability is the necessary but not sufficient risk factor for genocide. All of the genocides that have occurred since 1945 have happened during or just after a period of major political instability. So this should raise red flags, right? But we have countries all over the world that are massively unstable that are not going to become genocidal conflicts. So that's why we need all of these other risk factors to raise the right red flags. Polarized elites. This is Omar al-Bashir of Sudan, an Arab fundamentalist, Islamist ruling dictator who has a serious need to Arabize and Islamize his entire country, and has such committed, he's now in the midst of launching a 4th genocide right this second. And not Darfur, guys, in South Kordofan, just to the south of Darfur. Polarized elites, whether they're polarized based on ethnicity or based on religion or based on some other defining subset of their group, often become a little insecure in that polarization. In particular, if they're minority groups, that actually winds up being more dangerous, usually, than if the elite is a majority group. It's kind of interesting to me, but I'm a genocide dork. This should be no shocker. Ideology is a huge issue when it comes to genocide. If a government has an overtly exclusionary ideology, if you see policies within the government that clearly point to discrimination of specific groups, start sounding the alarm. We have a problem. In 1935, when the Nuremberg laws were passed and removed the rights of citizenship specifically from the Jews, red flag. That should have told us something. We've got the Khmer Rouge symbol. We've got serious exclusionary Marxism. Not all Marxism. Very exclusionary Marxism. Type of regime. Shockingly, democracies don't often commit genocide. Mostly because the crazies can't get enough power in democracies. There are definitely people in our own democracy that would be psyched to commit genocide. Just give them the way to do it. But they can't get enough power. Not shockingly, autocracies don't as often commit genocide as you might think. They have tight-fisted control over their regimes, and so there's usually not enough political space for them to feel threatened enough to have to commit genocide. That said, the country that wound up as number 2 on our risk assessment list of all of the countries in the world last year was Syria. And we thought this was at play, that the government had such an iron-fisted control over the regime that there was no way anybody would have the political power enough and to be a threat to the Assad regime. But we said in our risk assessment, if any one group emerged as a political threat in a context where that threat could feel existential to the government, like their absolute existence was at stake, we could see mass political violence, if not genocide, and it's kind of what we're seeing. Trade openness, which is a really fancy term for how connected are you financially. If a government is very connected financially to the rest of the world, then they have a lot more pressure to comply with international human rights norms, because somebody like the United States could put sanctions on you, or somebody like the EU could put sanctions on you and cut off your ability to transact in the world financially. And for there to be a risk of genocide, there has to be a clear target. Again, this is a crime committed against a group. It's not overt political violence just randomly against anybody. It's against a specific group. So if you already see that there's a group that's being targeted for discrimination in a society, the Uyghurs in China, for example, then you should start getting a little concerned, especially if it meshes with some of these other building blocks of genocide. Again, these risk factors tell us where genocide is likely to happen. They don't tell us when. This isn't an early warning system, but it can tell us in the short term where we may need to manage upcoming crises, and in the long term, it gives us some knowledge about long-term strategic thinking that we can start doing, diplomatic measures that we can take, economic aid that we can help, development programs that we can create in some of these countries to ease some of these tensions. And if we start thinking more long-term and more strategically about some of these things, we may actually get into the realm of genocide prevention, as opposed to adding what now looks like a 47th genocide into our world lexicon. Sudan is one of the genocides that's happening right now. As most of you probably know, in the Darfur region of Sudan, about 400,000 people have already been killed. Darfur was Sudan's third genocide, the first committed against the southern Sudanese. South Sudan has now just emerged as the world's newest nation. About 2 million people were killed over a period of 20 years of incredibly bloody civil war. Launched in that same time period specifically against the Nuba people who are in South Kordofan. There's the genocide in Darfur, where the government has been targeting civilians who may or may not support a very real rebel group that has, or several very real rebel groups that sprang up in 2003. But this was not a civil war in Darfur. Even though there are rebel groups fighting against the government had a choice to fight a civil war here, and they decided instead to get at the fish by draining the sea, to kill all the civilians who might support the Sudanese rebels, the Darfurian rebels, instead of fighting a military insurgency. Again, the Sudanese government is now launching its fourth genocide, again against the Nuba people in South Kordofan. We've received very credible reports, and even the US and the UN have talked about it, of door-to-door raids of the Nuba civilians, of executions at the door, of summary executions. We found a number of mass graves, and the government is specifically targeting humanitarian aid and not allowing humanitarian aid into the region for well over a month now to try to starve people out. Congo. In Congo, which Jewish World Watch also deals with, Congo's not a genocide. We have had 5.4 million people killed in Congo since 1996. 45,000 people continue to die every month, and new statistics just came out that tell us that 1,100 women and girls aged 15 to 49 are raped every single day in Congo. That's 48 women an hour, one woman nearly every minute. And even that number is probably a gross underestimation. But it's not a genocide. It's not being committed against a specific group. And yet these are crimes so egregious that Jewish World Watch, as the Jewish response to genocide and mass atrocities, could not ignore them, and I urge you not to ignore them either. Ladies in the audience, and the men too, frankly, I struggle with how to explain what is happening to the women and girls of Congo. The word rape doesn't cover it. I'll put it this way. I was a new mom when we first went to Congo in 2009. My child at the time was 5.5 months old. And I met girls Lena's age or a little bit older who were victims of rape. In Congo, it's not about sex and it's not about power. It's about the wholesale destruction of communities through the bodies of women and girls. The armed groups committing atrocities know that by doing so, by destroying the women, they can destroy the lifeblood and the heart of the community. And by doing that, they can terrorize and displace the populations. Now, the conflict has deep roots in Congo, but on the surface, it has devolved into a war over Congo's precious mineral wealth. That mineral wealth is in this thing, that projector, your pocket, in your cell phone right now, in tin, tantalum, tungsten, and gold. Our electronics companies need to hear from us that we want products untainted by Congo's illegal conflict minerals trade. There are, of course, a million ways, believe it or not, that you can fight genocide. There are actions that you can take to impose credible, coercive consequences on the government of Sudan right now. There are phone calls that you can make to ensure that we get a special envoy for Congo and a conflict-free supply chain in our electronics products. All of these actions are available at our website. I urge you to take them, and of course I'll be around for questions afterwards. If there is one thing that I would ask all of you to do, it would be to read consciously. the news around us. Rabbi Schulweis, who founded Jewish World Watch, said that the most important word in Jewish liturgy and everything that we read is the word v'lechen, and therefore. That every single thing that we read comes back to, and therefore, this is what we must do. In Judaism, there is no knowledge that does not lead to action. And so you know, and so you must do. And therefore, visit our website and take some action. Thank you.